been our pattern to preach from the same passage, the second message, as we did the first. However, we're going to break that pattern. Well, there is much more to be said about what we read in Luke chapter 2. This morning we'd like to turn to Matthew chapter 12, and we want to read 3 verses here in Matthew chapter 12. In verse 6, "But I say unto you, that in this place is one greater than the temple." In verse 41, and then verse 42, "The men of Nineveh shall rise in judgment with this generation, and shall condemn it, because they repented at the preaching of Jonas. And behold, a greater than Jonas is here. The queen of the south shall rise up in the judgment with this generation, and shall condemn it. For she came from the uttermost parts of the earth to hear the wisdom of Solomon. And behold, a greater than Solomon is here." In each of these verses, Christ, of course, is speaking. And in each verse, he makes a very definitive, a very dogmatic, and unrestrictive statement regarding himself. In verse 6, "In this place is one greater than the temple." In verse 41, "Behold, a greater than Jonas is here." And in verse 42, "Behold, a greater than Solomon is here." Now, between verse 6, the first declaration of Christ, and verses 41 and 42, the second and third declarations, there are several events that transpire that are not recorded here in Matthew chapter 12. And a lot of time passes between verse 6 and verses 41 and 42. So we need to be clear on this, that what we've just read does not occur on the same day or in the same place. Now, by way of background, leading up to verse 6, Jesus and the disciples are in a cornfield, and it's the Sabbath day, and they're picking corn. When the Pharisees saw this, they became greatly disturbed. And Jesus, in verses 3 through 8, speaks to them concerning their disturbance of mind. And verse 6 is a part of what he said to them. In verse 9, you'll notice that Jesus enters into a synagogue. Okay, he's no longer in a cornfield. Jesus is in a synagogue. And as you read on there, you see that he heals a man with a withered hand. Once again, the Pharisees are greatly disturbed. And we read in verse 14 that they went out. That is, they went out of the synagogue. And they held a council against him, how they might destroy him. In verse 15, Jesus departs. So he's no longer in the synagogue. And great multitudes followed him. And it says he healed them all. In verses 17 through 21, Jesus is seen teaching from the book of Isaiah. And then between verses 21 and 22, verse 21, we read, "And in his name shall the Gentiles trust." And in between that and what is said in verse 22, many things take place. You know this by considering the other Gospels. Here are some of the things that took place between verses 21 and 22. Jesus selects the 12 between verses 21 and 22. Between verses 21 and 22, you have the Sermon on the Mount. Between verses 21 and 22, you have the healing of the centurion's servant. You have the raising of a widow's son in the city of Nain. You have a variety of teachings of Jesus Christ. The feet of Jesus were anointed between verses 21 and 22. And you have the parable of the debtor between verses 21 and 22. And then you come to verse 22, and there is record of Jesus healing a demonic. As a result, in verse 23, all the people were amazed and said, "Is not this the Son of David?" The Pharisees were again, time has passed. Pharisees haven't changed. Again, they are greatly disturbed, and they begin to blaspheme. And in verses 24 through 37, Jesus very strongly rebukes and condemns them for their blasphemy. And then in verse 38, we read that certain of the scribes and Pharisees, as you read on, you see that they manifested their unbelief in asking for a sign. In other words, Jesus, you say you're so-and-so, you say you're the Son of God, prove it. They had willfully shut their eyes to the many wonderful works which Jesus had already done. And they're saying, we want more proof. We want more proof. Jesus, in verse 39 through 45, again sharply rebukes them, this time for seeking a sign or further proof. And then in verses 41 and 42, our text are part of that rebuke. So again, what we read in verse 6 and what we read in verse 41 and 42, different place, much time, many events have occurred between the two. But in each of these verses, Jesus makes declarations about himself. Verse 6, in this place is one greater than the temple. And then many things happen. A fair amount of time passes. And he says in verse 41, "Behold, a greater than Jonas is here." And in verse 42, "A greater than Solomon is here." Three declarations declaring a basic truth. And all the events that transpired, and all the time that had passed between the first and the second and third declarations, did not change one iota of the truth that was made in these declarations. And between what Jesus said in our text and now, innumerable events have transpired. Approximately 2,000 years have passed, and the truth of these declarations are still so today. We want to center our thoughts upon these three statements. In this place is one greater than the temple. Behold, a greater than Jonas is here. Behold, a greater than Solomon is here. And we want to speak upon a greater than is. A greater than is. Again, the first thing we want to do is consider the details of these statements. We want to notice 7 things about these statements. And then we'll make some application. Again, these 3 statements coming from Jesus ought to be of great encouragement and strength for God's people. These statements ought to fill our hearts with blessed assurance and strong confidence and sweet peace. 3 statements coming from Jesus that ought to embolden and invigorate the child of God. 3 statements coming from Jesus that ought to be a driving force in our lives and ought to serve as powerful reminders. So let's look at these statements. We're going to consider them collectively. We're going to look at the details. Number 1, in each statement, Jesus calls for the attention of his hearers. In verse 6, we hear him say, I say unto you. With those words, he is directing their attention to himself. I say unto you. In verse 41 and 42, we hear him say, behold. An attention-getting word. As we've pointed out in the past, behold is a call. It is a call to ponder. It is a call to observe. It is a call to meditate. It is a call to give serious thought to what is about to be said. It is a call to earnestly examine, to study what is about to be said. It is also a word used when something extraordinary and momentous is about to be presented to our attention. Behold! And then once he has their attention, all eyes are upon him. He says, a greater than Jonas is here. And then he says, behold! Again, he has their attention. A greater than Solomon is here. The word behold also introduces, it's basically a word of exclamation. It's a word of wonder. In other words, what's about to be said is something wonderful, something extraordinary. So in each statement, the first thing Jesus does is calls upon them to fix their attention upon him. Oh, how we need our attention fixed upon him. That doesn't mean that we ignore everything else. What it means is everything else is not the focus. He is the focus. God's people, their focus is horrible. It's horrible. They put the focus, they put the emphasis on the wrong things. They do it day in and day out. Number 2, in each statement, Jesus speaks exclusively of himself. In verse 6, he says, in this place is one, not 2, not 3, 1. Referring to himself, referring to a single individual. In this place is one. In verse 41 and 42, it is, behold, a. Again, something singular. Something exclusive. So, in our text verses, what Jesus says of himself, he is in and of himself without the participation of any other. He is greater than. He is the one. Number 3, in each statement, Jesus used the word greater in referring to himself. Now the word great, of course, is an adjective. It is a word that describes a person, place, or thing. It expresses degree. It expresses the measure of something. It is a word that is used to express something remarkable, something magnificent, something splendid. It is a word used to express importance, great. It is a word used to express influence or effect. But in our text, Jesus, speaking of himself, uses the word greater, another adjective. And what he's saying is, I excel, I go beyond that which is great. The temple was great. Jonah was great. Solomon was great. I'm greater. I go beyond what is great. What he's saying is, I am more. I am more. The temple is something, but I'm more. Jonah was important. Solomon was important. But I am more. How many times people have said, oh, but you don't understand how important this is. I won't be at church Sunday. You don't understand how important this is. No, you don't understand. Jesus says, I am more. Whatever else is going on, I am more. So know this, Jesus is more. Jesus is more remarkable. Jesus is more magnificent. Jesus is more important. Jesus is of greater influence and effect. So in each of these statements, Jesus draws attention to his greatness, his eminence, his significance, his prominence. Know this, Jesus is greater. Fourthly, in each statement, Jesus draws a comparison. The very word greater is a word of comparison. And since he's drawing a comparison, you must have an object of comparison. So in each statement, verse 6, verse 41 and 42, he uses the word than. A greater than. Again, what follows then is the object. Is the object he's comparing himself to. So the word than must have an object before it, and it must have an object after it. Jesus is the object before. The temple, Jonah, and Solomon are the objects after, or on the other side of them. Remember the woman at the well. John 4, verse 12. She said, art thou greater than our father Jacob? Thou before than, Jacob after than. In John 8, verse 53, the unbelieving Jews asked Jesus, art thou greater than our father Abraham? Now the answer to those questions, and all questions like them, is this. Jesus is greater. Jesus is more. No matter what or who you put side by side with him, he's more. He excels. He goes beyond. No matter what or who you put on this side of than, he is more. He is more. He's more remarkable. He's more magnificent. He's more important. He is more. Fifthly, in each of these statements, Jesus refers to time. 3 statements, and in each one he refers to time. In verse 6, is, that's time, is greater than the temple. In verse 41, a greater than Jonas is. And verse 42, a greater than Solomon is. In other words, it's always so. It doesn't matter how much time passed. It doesn't matter how many events have transpired. It doesn't matter. It covers all time. Sixthly, Jesus in each of these statements refers to place. We hear him say in verse 6, in this place, he was in a cornfield. In this place is one greater than. And then in verse 41, a greater than Jonas is here, referring to location. And a greater than Solomon is here. So Jesus is greater regardless of time and regardless of place. Amen. Seventhly, in each of these statements, Jesus refers to his presence. In verse 6, in this place is. That's his presence. Verse 41, a greater than is here. Is here. That's his presence. Verse 42, a greater than is here. So the one who is greater and more than is present. Doesn't matter place, doesn't matter time. He is. So in our text, Jesus calls for our attention, and then he makes 3 unrestrictive statements. These statements are not restricted by time or place. They're unrestricted statements regarding himself. And in each statement, he is saying to each one of us, I am here, and I, in and of myself, am greater and more than all else. And this is so no matter what, when, or where. In each of these statements, he says to each of us, I am greater than, and this is always so, and it is everywhere so. This needs to have our attention. This needs to have our attention. It's something we ought to always ponder. Something we ought to always give serious thought and consideration to. This is something that needs to get a hold of us. A greater than is. That's always so. None of us know what we might have to go through in the coming days. None of us know. We have no idea. Oh, there's people who think they know, but I assure you they don't. None of us know. None of us know. But we do know this, that regardless of place, regardless of time, Jesus is greater than. And whatever you and I might have to face, wherever it is, whatever time it is, Jesus is greater than. So let's make some application. Jesus is. And he is greater than the temple. Now, the temple was great in God's plan. But Jesus, God's plan in Jesus, is greater. The temple was a manifestation of truth. But Jesus is greater. The temple was, in the Pharisees' eyes, the most glorious representation of God on earth. Jesus is greater. The Pharisees honored the temple as the most holy place on earth, the dwelling place of God. Jesus is greater. The temple at the time was the most valuable piece of real estate on the earth. But Jesus is greater. A greater than Jonas is here. Jonah was a proclaimer of truth. He was a proclaimer of the will of God. Jesus more. Doesn't matter what anyone else says. Doesn't really matter. Because Jesus is a greater proclaimer of truth. A greater than Solomon. Solomon was the greatest builder that Israel had ever known. He had more wealth, he had more power, he had more affluence and more prestige than any other ruler. And Jesus is greater. You see, the Pharisees' way of thinking was Solomon, he was a king's son. Jesus, he's just the son of a peasant. But Jesus is greater. In the Pharisees' thinking, Solomon wore a king's robe. Jesus wore a simple garment. But Jesus is greater. In their thinking, Solomon had armies. Jesus, a few stragglers following him. Solomon lived in a palace. Jesus didn't have anywhere to lay his head. But Jesus is greater. Solomon had 1,400 chariots, 1,200 horsemen, 40,000 stalls of horses. And when Solomon rode forth, he rode in comfort. And yet Jesus walked almost everywhere he went. Jesus is greater. Solomon associated with people of high esteem, and Jesus with publicans and sinners. The point is this: in spite of appearance, Jesus is greater. No matter what it appears, Jesus is greater. Oh, this is the biggest problem I've ever had in my life. No one's ever had a problem of this magnitude. And that may be appearance to you. But appearance isn't fact. It's appearance. No matter what the appearance, Jesus is greater. And he declares himself greater. In this place is one greater than the temple. In this place, right now, is one greater than the temple. In this place, right now, is one greater than Jonah, one greater than Solomon. Now, these were shocking and unbelievable statements to the Pharisees. To us, they're not shocking. But to the Pharisees, these were outlandish statements. And I'm sure there isn't anyone here who has any problem or difficulty believing that Jesus is greater than the temple. That Jesus is greater than Jonah. That Jesus is greater than Solomon. None of us would argue that. We all believe that. But do we believe and practice that he is always, no matter what the time, no matter what the place, greater than, more than, whoever, whatever is on the other side of than. Do we believe and practice that? No. Not like we ought to. Oh, we do at times. But do we consistently believe and practice in our own lives that Jesus is greater than whatever is on the other side of than? All through the Gospels, we read of people who found Jesus to be greater than. We have it all through the Gospels. You take all the healing miracles, you take the miracles over nature, all through the Gospels, people discovered Jesus is greater than. Jesus is greater than this disease. Jesus is greater than this need. Jesus is greater than this circumstance. Jesus is greater than this storm. It's revealed over and over and over. Jesus is greater. He's greater than any problem that you'll ever face. He's greater than any trial, greater than any difficulty, greater than any need, greater than any so-called impossibility. He's greater than any infirmity, greater than any condition that you or your loved ones or your acquaintances might face. Do we believe that? Do we practice that? So in our text, the picture is this. On this side of than, you have Jesus. And regardless of time and place, He is greater than whatever is on this side of than. Question is, what side of than do we live on? This side or this side? The question is, what side of than do we focus upon? On this side of than, there are problems, there are trials, there are difficulties, there are great needs. But on this side of than is one greater than whatever is on this side. On this side may be overwhelming cares and burdens. But on this side there is always one greater than whatever your burden, whatever your care. On this side of than there may be tremendous pressures, great distress. But on this side is the Almighty God, greater than whatever is on this side. Which do we focus upon? Upon which do we put the emphasis? Where do we live? This side or this side? It doesn't matter. It doesn't mean that you don't see what's on this side. What it means is that the one on this side overshadows whatever is on this side. That's what it means. So, on this side of than is my Savior, my Redeemer, my Shepherd, my friend. On this side, there may be dense darkness, but He's greater than. He's greater than. Again, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't. It doesn't matter what you put on this side of than, because the one on this side is always greater. Well, what if? It doesn't matter. It does not matter. He is greater. But where is our focus? If we're honest, many times we get swallowed up with what's on this side of than. And we tend to forget the one that's greater on this side. And this is where our problems come in, is when we put the emphasis in the wrong place. We get out of focus. Whatever upheaval might be on this side of then, there's peace greater than the upheaval in Jesus Christ. However fierce the winds may be blowing on this side of then, there's a hiding place greater than the wind on this side. And the one on this side is so great, he just overwhelms what's on the other side. He doesn't just stay on this side. He's everywhere. Take any need, take any care, take any burden that you might have at any time, at any place, and put it side by side with Jesus, and He's greater than. And He is more than. Take any problem, take any trial, take any pressure, take any turmoil, any chaos, any upheaval, any uncertainty or challenge that you have at any time or at any place, and put it side by side with Jesus, and He is greater than. He is more than. Take any disappointment, take any frustration, any discouragement, any sorrow, any heartache that you have any time or any place, and He's greater. He's more than. He's what you need. He's always what we need. Don't lose sight of the one who's on this side of then. Take any infirmity. Take any condition, whether it be a physical condition, a spiritual condition, an emotional condition, doesn't matter. Take any condition. Take any temptation. Any confusion, any anxiety, any fear that you have any time or any place, and He's greater. He's more than. You take anything that's shattered, anything that's broken, anything that's torn or ruined, Jesus is greater. Jesus can put it back together. People may get to a place where they can honestly say, I've ruined it and I can't fix it. That's true. But there's one that's greater. And He can fix whatever you ruin. He can. He can. He can fix whatever you've broken. And that's always so. You take any giant you may have to face. He's greater. He's greater than any giant. So no matter how dark it might be, no matter how fierce the storm, no matter how deep the valley, no matter how steep and rocky the way might be, and no matter how long the road may be, no matter the time, no matter the place, Jesus is greater. Jesus is more. Take any wilderness, take any desert that you might find yourself in, and you will find yourself in a wilderness from time to time. You will find yourself in a desert from time to time. You will be faced with rivers that you cannot pass over. But on the other side is one greater. Take any obstacle that you can't get past. Jesus is greater. Take any impossibility that you might have, no matter the time, no matter the place. Jesus is greater. So, whatever your now is, and no matter where your place is, no matter where your there is, know this: Jesus is more. Jesus is greater than. Hear Him say. in this place, whatever that place is one greater than. In this place is one greater than. And I believe when we get ourselves in some difficult places, if we just calm down, be quiet, and open our ears, we would hear Jesus speaking those words. In this place is one greater than whatever it is you are experiencing. We're not trying to downplay what someone might have to experience on this side of then. We're trying to exalt the one that's on this side of then. Know with absolute certainty and assurance, Jesus is greater. And there is abundant testimony of it all through the Word of God. Fasten your eyes upon the one who is greater than. Live on this side, not this side. Live over here. Focus upon Him. Again, which side of then are you living on? Which side of then do you emphasize? Do you focus upon? I mean, I've had people get mad. I mean mad. When you try to get them to not focus over here and focus over here, and they get angry. Well, you're making my problems sound like nothing. No, that's not what I'm doing. Get off of yourself and focus over here. Now, if you're unsaved, know today that Jesus is greater than all your sin. Some may say, I've done terrible things. We all have. But whatever it is you've done, I'm here to tell you today, Jesus is greater than what you've done. And in Him is a cleansing, a forgiveness, and a righteousness greater than all your sin. Jesus is greater than all your guilt. And there is a pardon in Him greater than all your guilt. Jesus is greater than your condemnation. And in Him is a justification greater than your condemnation. Jesus is greater than your alienation. And in Him is a nearness greater than. Lost sinner, Jesus is greater than your sin. He is greater than the chains of sin and your spiritual confinement. Oh, I feel so unworthy. Good, you ought to. But Jesus is greater than your unacceptableness. He's greater than. He's greater than your spiritual bankruptcy. And in Him is riches that go beyond the depths of your spiritual poverty. In other words, there's hope. As long as there's this one who's greater than, however miserable man might be, there's hope in Him. So know today, Jesus is greater. This is always so. This is everywhere so. Right now. Whatever your situation, great Jesus is greater than. He's not only greater than the temple, He's not only greater than Jonas, not only greater than Solomon, He's greater than whatever you might be going through. So whatever you can put after the word then, know Jesus is greater. Whatever the place, wherever your here is, whatever time, Jesus is greater. And we read this in 1 John 1, or 1 John 4 and verse 4, greater is He that is in you than he that is in the world. This one who is greater than, for you and I that are saved, lives within. and He's greater than. Oh, I can't get through this. Yes, you can. Because within you is one greater than. When you say, I can't get through this, you're partially right. You, in and of yourself, cannot. But there's one in you that is greater than. So we can leave here and go out there knowing Jesus is greater. Jesus is greater. Don't put the emphasis anywhere else. I don't care what it is. Put the emphasis on Jesus Christ. And I promise you, everything looks different. Depending on where you put the emphasis, that's how things appear. But you put the emphasis upon Jesus Christ, and things look different. You don't have to deny, well, we have some terrible things. We're not denying that. But let us put the emphasis on the right one, Jesus Christ. Brother Dave, if you'd come and lead us